Can AI help me become a better parent? I recently learned how to program my own chatbot coach in ChatGPT by training it in my professional core competencies as well as my own personal style as a coach. Today, we're going to see how well it implemented it and how well it can coach me now. I'll also share my reaction and feedback to the overall quality of coaching that it's providing me. Now, with all that said, let's get coaching. Okay, let's get started. I recently had a conversation with my husband about how we report updates about our kids to family. I noticed that his reports were often mostly positive. My reports included both positive and negative, but tended to focus more on the challenges we were facing. This is not isolated to just this area of my life. I often find that my brain remembers the challenges or negative memories more vividly than the positive ones. While I'm not interested in plastering some toxic positivity over my thoughts and memories, I am curious what this pattern is really about. Why do I tend to focus on, remember, and report the negative side of my experience? And if I change that, I wonder how that would change or even improve my experience in parenthood. There's something really honest and self aware in what you're noticing. You're not trying to force yourself into fake positivity, just genuinely curious about your own pattern. That's a powerful place to start. And what you're describing, it's very human. Our brains are actually wired with what psychologists called a negativity bias. We remember and prioritize challenges because evolutionarily, that's what kept us safe. So part of this isn't something wrong with you, it's something protective in you. But here's where it gets interesting and personal. You and your husband are essentially telling two different versions of reality, not because one is right and one is wrong, but because each of you is selecting which feels most salient, meaningful, or important to share. So I'm curious, when you find yourself focusing on the challenges, whether in your kids or life more broadly, what feels most important about naming or remembering those harder parts? What does that do for you? So right away, my first impression here is that it skipped over establishing a coaching request with me, which is feedback that I had the first filming and then implemented into the programming, and clearly it has not changed its ways. Maybe that's something that I can continue to refine, but maybe it's just a shortcoming of this bot. Either way, if we're just diving straight into the conversation and we're not going to establish my ultimate goal for what I want out of it, then this is a decent place to start. Asking what this pattern does for me is a really powerful awareness building question because, as I say to my clients, we never do anything for free. We always get something out of a pattern that we live inside of. Even if it has a high cost to us, there is something that we're getting in return, kind of like why we eat candy and pizza is it's not that great for us, but it tastes really good. So there's something that tastes really good about this pattern of mine that focuses or remembers these challenges more vividly. So let's explore that. Focusing on the challenges is often how I discern growth areas in my life. So where I'm struggling can become a coaching conversation with my coach or therapist. So it often benefits me to notice them. In parenting and other areas, identifying a struggle can help me name my feelings and or troubleshoot with problem solving, or simply receiving empathy from friends and family. I also think it's partly how I build relationship with my close circle. Sharing my struggles is part of what makes us human and lets people in. But I think I do this more than I need to. I think I fuel the internal narrative about this hard season by externalizing it and making it the story of my experience. And I don't give enough focus and verbalization of the beauty, joy, and uniqueness of this season. That has been a lifelong pattern I've worked on changing, but I think could use some more refining now as a parent. There's a lot of wisdom in what you just said. You're not just venting, you're using challenges as a doorway to growth, connection, and meaning. That's incredibly intentional. And I hear the subtle shift you're naming. It's not that the hard focus is wrong, it's that it's becoming the headline instead of one chapter in a much richer story. Almost like your mind is an editor that keeps choosing the conflict-driven plot line because that's where the learning is, but maybe it's over-editing out the quieter, beautiful scenes. So let me ask you this. If someone were to tell the story of this season of your life based on only what you tend to share out loud, what version of you and of motherhood would they come away believing is true? Whew, I gotta read that question again. If someone were to tell the story of this season of your life based on what you tend to share out loud, what version of you and of motherhood would they come away believing is true? What version of me would they come away believing is true? That is a strange question, and my brain is not receiving this question. I liked the setup of if someone were to tell the story of the season of life based on only what you tend to share out loud, maybe they just mean what would they come away believing is true, not what version of me and of motherhood would they believe is true. Because what version of me is true? That just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm just going to chalk this up to AI being AI. Okay, so if you are asking, what would they, what would they come away believing is true based on the stories I tend to share about this season? They would believe my postpartum experience has been quite an uphill battle between a toddler transitioning into a big sister, lots of sickness this season, 6 months of breastfeeding through the night, and eventually sleep training, debilitating insomnia, childcare challenges, marital challenges, and fitness setbacks. I could paint a bleak picture of what these 7 months have been like. The thing is that those conversations I'm having in real time with my husband are only about 2% of my days. A lot of it is playful, sweet, so cute I could pop kind of memories. But when I catch up with someone I haven't spoken to in weeks or even months, I find my summaries focus heavily on that 2%. There's something beautifully precise in your awareness. You're not misseeing your life. You're misweighting it when you tell the story. It's like 2% of your experience is getting 80% of the microphone. And I hear something even deeper. The hard moments are processed, shared, made meaningful, while the joyful ones are almost so natural, so abundant, they pass through without being claimed in the same way. So here's what I'm really curious about. What do you think makes the joyful, playful, so cute I could pop moments less likely to be spoken out loud or centered in your story? What's different about those moments compared to the hard ones? Okay, so before I answer that question, my initial reaction is that although this question isn't bad and will offer some sort of insight to me next, it doesn't go deep. If I were coaching me, I would be really curious about this client's relationship to joy, because how I do this in one area is how I do it everywhere, as I've already identified it in the context of this conversation. I've said this isn't just about how I talk about parenting. This is kind of how I do life. And where my mind as a coach is going while I'm even being the coachee is that it seems like my relationship to vulnerability is that like the way I build relationship is through vulnerability. And vulnerability I personally access through sharing my challenges, sharing the things that are not shiny and bright and beautiful like Instagram worthy. They're the things that are underneath for me. And that is how I build closeness with people. However, from my coaching background, if I'm putting my coach hat on, one of the things I know to be true is that joy, pure, unbridled joy, is actually one of the most vulnerable experiences we have in humanity, because it's almost instinctual when a human feels joy to immediately protect themselves with a when's the shoe going to drop? Or is this too good to be true? Or what's going to happen next that might ruin this whole thing? Because it's extremely vulnerable to feel totally unfiltered joy. And I think if I were to be coaching myself, I would be asking about that, about what vulnerability means to me, about what the connection is between vulnerability and joy is, and what could create relationship differently from a place of joyful vulnerability rather than the vulnerability of my struggles. So if I were the coach, that would be the direction I would want to take this conversation. But I'm not, the AI is, so let's go this way. First thing that comes to mind is that I don't have as easy a time describing these moments as deeply or vividly as I do with the struggle moments. Meaning, when I say it is so precious to me to see the girls become true sisters or good friends to each other, it makes my heart swell. I don't have much else to add to that. It's like this part of me is more succinct than my other parts. that need a lot more space to verbally process. That's a revealing distinction. Your struggles ask for language. They demand to be worked through, unpacked, understood. But your joy, it sounds like it just is. Complete, whole, almost beyond words. Like one part of your life is a puzzle to solve and the other is a sunset. You don't analyze a sunset, you just stand in it. And yet, when it comes time to tell the story, the puzzle takes up all the airtime because they have more explainable content. So here's what I'm wondering. What if the richness of these joyful moments isn't in needing more words, but in allowing them to be lingered on, even if they're simple? What do you notice happens in you when you try to stay with one of those moments just a little longer than it feels natural? Cool. Um, First of all, I love this style of a question of like, what would it be like to stay in an uncomfortable feeling or an uncomfortable practice just a little bit longer than feels natural? I've asked that question 1,000 different times, so I very much appreciate it asking that of me here. I can feel the urge when I imagine myself in those conversations to want to move on quickly from that moment in the story. It's a reflection of my unease with silence. Since I don't have many words to fill things in, I just move forward with more words. But this practice of staying with the silence or the feeling that I'm imparting seems really valuable for me to implement. Staying with joy 1% longer, letting the sweetness and happiness linger a bit longer would feel a little more vulnerable and special to share with people I love. There's something really tender in what you just named. It's not actually about more positivity, it's about your relationship with silence, presence, and being seen in joy. See, it's telling me about my awareness rather than helping support me in arriving there. So we got there, but oh well. Because notice the shift. Struggle invites connection through processing. Joy invites connection through presence. And presence asks more of us. It's quieter, less scripted, a little more exposing. You said something beautiful. Staying with joy 1% longer. That's not a performance change. That's a way of being witnessed. So here's the question I want to leave you with. When you imagine letting someone really sit with you in one of those joyful word light moments, without rushing past it, what feels vulnerable about being seen there? There we go. Okay. It is using my word that I said, vulnerable. So it's not putting words in my mouth in my experience like it did in my previous AI video. Um, and just like I just said, I think I just got there sooner and I maybe would have just skipped a few steps that the AI took to eventually get there. Plus, I may have also fed this to the AI with my answer, since I did mention that it does feel a little bit vulnerable to linger in the happiness and the joy. And I, said the practice of staying with joy 1% longer. That's something that I have offered to clients. So it's something that I would say in my own answer at this point. So it's hard to say whether the result of this question is because I let it there with my answer or if it was actually going to just land here eventually and I got there in my mind before it did. But either way, I'm going to let this be our final question for the day and maybe we can see how it wraps up. This is my final response for today's conversation. So thank you for this final question. It feels vulnerable to linger in these joyful moments because this season of parenting, while negotiating with sleep deprivation, compromised well being, and at times feeling under supported, that I have been stuck in survival mode when I consider truly accessing presence and joy with my inner circle that offers me the chance to leave survival mode and simply witness my life more wholly, which is a beautiful gift, but also easier said than done. Thank you for this supportive conversation. What is your parting wisdom for me? It said, what you just said holds so much truth. It's not that you don't have joy, it's that joy requires a different nervous system state than survival does. And you've been doing something really important, surviving a demanding, stretching season with honesty and intention. So here's the gentle reframe I want to offer you, almost like placing a new lens in your hand. You don't have to leave survival mode to access joy. You're actually being invited to let joy coexist with survival. There's my both and. Even in small, imperceptible ways. Not a full exit, just a soft widening. The way you said it, staying with joy 1% longer. That's it. That's the work. Not transformation, permission. And maybe this is the shift. Instead of asking, why don't I share more joy? You might begin asking, where is joy already here that I'm moving past too quickly? Because it's already happening. You named it. The sister moments, the sweetness, the so cute I could pop. Those aren't small things. That's the texture of your life. So my parting thought for you is this. What if your role isn't to become someone who tells more positive stories, but to become someone who trusts that the quiet, simple, word-light moments are already enough and worthy of being shared just as they are? You don't need better words. You might just need one more breath in the moment before you move on. Well, that's sweet. All right, my overall impression of this conversation definitely shifted when we finally got to this intersection of joy and vulnerability, which, again, as I said, I brought to the table. But either way, I think the awareness that it created for me of I'm not doing anything wrong and I don't need more words for my experience of joy when I share about it with friends and family. It's simply a being practice, a presence practice to just sit with that moment a little longer and really give it some more gravitas as much as I give gravitas to, the requests for support that I bring friends and family of like, I'm dealing with this thing. What did you do? What should I do? Help. So instead of me only looking for empathy from them in the hard stuff, it's like, how can I also share with them the just pure joy that comes from this really beautiful season I'm in? And the fact that I don't have to leave survival mode in order to access that kind of presence was also a really great takeaway for me, the both and. My living, breathing mission in life is integrating both and, the dynamic coexistence of everything life has to offer. So I very much appreciated this coaching conversation. I am very curious to hear what you got out of listening to me be coached, what you thought of the questions, and if you agreed with my feedback about the depth that it could have gone versus what it did. And ultimately, if you decide to use this AI bot, what your experience is like. And with that, we've come to the end of today's episode of the Contentment Creator Podcast, where we put AI to the test to see if a chatbot can coach a life coach. Whether you caught the whole episode or one of our segments, either way, thank you so much for making it all the way to the end, and I hope that you are subscribed so you don't miss another episode. Join me in my mission to turn a world full of content creators into a world of contentment creators. Bye, y'all.